Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be sharing about the books that I read in the month of December. And I would recommend that you grab a cup of tea like I have here and settle in because there were a lot of books that I read in the month of December. I found myself getting close to 300 books read for the year and I decided to go for it. And that meant that I read over 40 books over the course of December. Now, why this was possible is because I had a 10-day break from work because of the holidays. And so I was really able to focus on reading, 2 to 3 books a day, which is honestly the best way to spend a winter break, in my opinion. But it did mean I was able to get through a really high volume of books over the winter break. So feel free to grab something to drink as you settle in to watch this video. So I started the month reading a book that has gotten a lot of hype, and that is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. I overall enjoyed this book, but I found it to have just like these layered tropes that were ended up like it was a lot. Like there were a lot of layers to this book. So the general premise is you have a ghostwriter who is writing romance novels on behalf of someone else, and she gets a new editor. And this ghostwriter also happens to be able to see ghosts. That's not a spoiler. And very early in the relationship of meeting her new editor, he dies and she encounters him as a ghost. And they end up having a bit of a romance. This was a book that I really picked up because everybody was talking about it. And the New York Times had a great review. And I thought it was fine. But I don't know if I kind of understand all of the hype for this particular book. Then I picked up another romance, Love Lettering by Clayborn. This is a book about a woman who does lettering, like she does calligraphy, and she had created a wedding announcement for this couple. And in the announcement, she kind of embedded this almost like a coded thing where she said that she thought their relationship wasn't going to work out. And lo and behold, their relationship does not work out, and she ends up meeting the man of that relationship. He comes back to her and he has seen the coded language that was kind of hidden in this announcement. And so they end up having a relationship that's kind of very interesting. This book had a lot of layers to it that I wasn't anticipating, and the ending was also very surprising. I would definitely pick up this author again and really enjoy this book. Okay, I'm going to combine a couple of books, one that I read in the beginning of the month and one that I read at the tail end of the month. And that is the last 2 books in the Wheel of Time series. So I was able to complete this series. I worked on it all year long. If you've been watching these videos, you know I've been kind of chipping away at this series. And I got the last couple of books read. One I read very early on in December, and then the other one I finished like a couple days before the end of the month. I loved how this series wrapped up. It was such an investment to kind of go through the entire set of books, and there were a lot of things kind of wrapped up in the final book. A lot of things that over time came to make more sense to me about what the series was about, what the world was that was being built. Super satisfying to finish that series in this last month of the year. Okay, then I also picked up 4 books in a series that is new to me. I read them at different points of the month, but I'm going to kind of combine some of these reviews just for brevity's sake, since there was so much that I read this month. And this is a series called The Edens. The first book is Indigo Ridge. The second book is Juniper Hill. The third book is Garnet Flats. And then there was a Christmas kind of novella called Christmas in Quincy. And this is basically a series of books that takes place in Montana, in a small town in Montana. And the first book is kind of like a mystery, like almost romantic suspense. And then the other books in this series, I would say, are a little bit more on the romantic suspense side as well. But basically, there are a set of siblings that live in this small town, and their ancestors kind of like formed this town. And in the first book, there is a new sheriff that moves into the town, a woman, and she ends up having a relationship with one of the brothers of the set of siblings. In the second book, there is a woman who moves into town and has a relationship with another set of the brothers in this set of siblings. And then the third book is a male love interest who moves into town and has a relationship with one of the sisters that's in the siblings. I actually really enjoy book series like this, where you have a series of characters that are all connected and each book kind of tackles one of their stories. This is one that I saw hyped to a major degree on Instagram. There were a couple people who had like binged this series, and I thought it would just be fun to kind of dive in It's available on Kindle Unlimited, which I do have access to. And so I decided to just kind of binge these books. So I read them almost all entirely in a row, and I thought they were great. I also was able to pick up and complete the last couple of books in the Armand Gamache series by Louise Penny. The first one is called The Madness of Crowds. The second one is called A World of Curiosities. And the most recent book, A World of Curiosities, was just released in November. So that was one I had not anticipated that I would have to read, but I added it into my list for December. And it was great. I actually thought this most recent addition to the series is one of maybe my top 3 of the entire series. I enjoyed it so much. It brings in characters and kind of plot points from like 5 or 6 books ago that kind of came into the series, but then they get kind of brought back in some really interesting ways. One of the reasons I think I really loved A World of Curiosities is it tells the origin story of Armand Gamache and his kind of second in command, Jean-Guy, and how they came to know each other through their first case. And that was a really fun kind of series of flashbacks, but super layered. Would definitely recommend reading the series in order because there's so much build that happens across the entire series. All right, next I read a book called Flux, 8 Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change by April Rinn. And this is a book I had stumbled across. I think I started it in the previous month, but I wasn't able to finish it until December. One of the things that really drew me into this book is there's an entire chapter on what the author calls career portfolios, which is basically pulling together various aspects of your skill sets to create a more kind of unique career that's not just like a ladder that goes vertically, but is more of a portfolio of things that you're pulling together. And that's something that I really identify with, I really resonate with. And so I really enjoyed reading this book. It also really focuses on this idea of flexibility in the midst of change, which I think many of us are probably finding to be a really helpful thing as we think about all of the different kinds of changes that have happened in the midst of the pandemic and a lot of transition for people who've like changed jobs or moved or had other kinds of things happen in their lives. So highly recommend it, thought it was really great. I also picked up Beth O'Leary's The Flat Share. This is a book that I had heard really great things about. I think this is an author that I've read before, but I hadn't picked up this book. And basically this is the story of a couple of people who are sharing a flat, but because of the schedules of their work, they never see each other. So there's a man who works a night shift and then a woman who works the day shift. And so they're living in the same place, but they're never kind of like crossing paths. And of course, eventually they do, and they have a romance. There's a great storyline in this book about kind of an injustice that has happened that they are trying to like right this injustice. And I enjoyed kind of that depth that was brought to this particular book. Would definitely pick up this author again, really enjoyed it. Okay, I also picked up Paul Millard's The Pathless Path, Imagining a New Story for Work and Life. I think this might have been one of my Alphabet Challenge books. I will admit, I don't remember much about where all these books fall in terms of why I was choosing them because they were just, the volume was so high in this month. But I think my Alphabet Challenge letter was P and Pathless Path was one of those books. I really enjoyed this book. It's basically the story of like reimagining a career trajectory. And like Flux, it has kind of some really interesting stories about how the author kind of stepped off of a very traditional career path and decided to pursue something different for himself. So I really enjoyed that as well. Also on my Alphabet Challenge was a book called The Plight Before Christmas by Kate Stewart. This was a book, first of all, it was kind of long. I wasn't expecting that. It's like 400 pages long. It's a romantic kind of comedy. And basically the storyline is there's a woman who goes to have Christmas with her family. And while she is there with her family, her brother brings home one of her exes, like from college. And they haven't seen each other for like 15 plus years, but they start to have some chemistry. And there's a whole history there of like why, you know, they didn't end up being together that we kind of learn throughout the book. Very Christmassy vibes if you're interested in that. This is definitely a book that I could see myself reading again in a future holiday season because I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done. All right, then I picked up The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams. This is another book series that I've just seen hyped everywhere. And basically the premise is you have men who are joining together in a book club and they're reading romances together and they're taking lessons from the romances and applying them to their relationships to try to make their relationships better. So kind of a funny premise. And you have a man who joins this book club because his marriage is kind of rocky and he's trying to fix it. And so you see him kind of applying the lessons from these romance novels to his marriage. One of the kind of fun elements of this book is that it has like these short chapters from the romance novel itself that get kind of inserted into the story. And so you can actually hear like the Regency romance. I was listening to it on audio, and then it goes back into the storyline of the actual characters in the book. Okay, then I picked up 3 books in a series by Sarah Morgenthaler, and this is the Moose Springs series. It takes place in a small town in Alaska. The first book is called The Tourist Attraction, and rough plot is you have a woman who comes into town as a tourist, and she starts to have a romance with someone who runs like a local restaurant, which is called The Tourist Attraction. And he's kind of sworn off ever getting involved with tourists, but then he falls in love, with this woman who comes into town. The second book is called Mistletoe and Mr. Right. And this is kind of continuing along with characters from the first book. The best friend of the tourist who comes into town and falls in love with the restaurant owner. She begins to have a romance with someone in town. And she's actually bought the town. She's very wealthy. And so she has purchased the town and is trying to do some development in the town. And that's causing some tension between her and the people who live in the town. And then the third book, Enjoy the View, is about the best friend of the restaurant owner. And he has a romance with an actress who comes into town, and she's filming a documentary about climbing a mountain. And so they end up climbing this mountain together, and it involves several of her kind of friends and coworkers who are there to also film this documentary. I will say that when I read the first book in this series, I wasn't like completely drawn into it, but I was drawn in enough to keep going. I wanted to kind of see what the author was doing with this. And as I mentioned, I really like books where the characters are connected, the series is connected, you get to kind of get different angles of the story from different character perspectives. I felt like this series got better as it went along, and it was like the author kind of settled into the characters and she settled into what she was trying to do, and that made it a lot more interesting for me to follow along. I don't know that there's a 4th book in this series yet, but I would imagine there'll be more, and I would definitely pick them up in the future. Okay, then I picked up another Alphabet Challenge book, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. This is a relatively short book. I listened to it on audio and also read the ebook alongside it. And it's hard to kind of describe what is going on in this book plot-wise, but basically you have a man who is like living in like a set of crumbling ruins, and there is another man who comes to visit him, and he's kind of like a caretaker for these ruins, and he often like travels around these ruins and is trying to make sure that like things are getting taken care of within the space. And it has kind of this mythical feel to it, like or like almost like Greek mythology or something like that. But I realized pretty early on, I think, like I kind of took a stab at what I thought was happening in this book, and I was correct in terms of kind of like what the author was trying to build. So it has kind of this underlying plot of what is going on that I don't want to get into because it would kind of spoil the story. But I would definitely recommend it. I thought it was really interesting. It's one that a lot of people have kind of talked about and been interested in. All right, next up I read a book called The Impossible Us by Sarah Lotz. This is a book, if you like romance that also involves quantum physics, this would be a book to check out. It's really interesting. I will say one of the things that I think is like a vote of confidence in this author is I finished this book and I like immediately went out to find out what other books she had available. And I checked a couple out from the library because I just really, really enjoyed it. So basically the premise of the story is you have a man and a woman who connect kind of accidentally over email. And I don't think it's giving away a spoiler to say that they eventually find out relatively quickly that they're basically living in different dimensions. And so they aren't able to be with each other, even though they're kind of developing this relationship through email. And this book, I would say, probably, it was a longer book, maybe about 400 pages. I really enjoyed the audio on this one and would highly recommend it. I definitely went out and found all the other books by this author because I just really enjoyed how she approached the story. Okay, then I picked up another book by John Mars called The Passengers. Now, this is a book that I was interested in this author because I previously read his other book called The One, which I really enjoyed. And so I decided to pick up this book. And of course, after this one, I also went out and found a bunch of his other books too, because I just found them to be really interesting. So the premise of this book is you have self-driving cars, and someone kind of hacks into the systems of several of these self-driving cars and starts to like take control of the cars and creates a kind of like reality show almost, where people are deciding who in the cars get crashed and like who gets killed, who's in these cars. And everybody who's in the car has some kind of secret that they're being revealed like throughout the course of this book. There is a slight connection between this book and The One in terms of like the universe that the author has built, which I thought was kind of fun. Was totally sucked in, really enjoyed this book, totally would pick up more by this author. Okay, then I picked up a book called Better Than Fiction by Alexa Martin. This is a book that should have checked every single one of my boxes. It's about a bookstore romance. It takes place in Denver, which is where I live. There were so many things that I was like, yep, this is gonna be great. And then I got into it and I honestly just didn't really enjoy it. I mean, it was fine. I think that it was kind of written in a way that everything hung together, like it made sense, but I don't know, maybe just when I picked it up, I wasn't in the right mood or something, but I expected this to be kind of like a like home run, and I just was like, oh, this is like an average book. Like I wasn't super excited by it. If you like books where there's like a romance taking place in a book setting, like a bookstore, might be something to try. Okay, this month I finally got to The Rise of Magics by Nora Roberts. This is the third book in the Chronicles of the One series. I have been trying to get to this for months, and I was like, this is gonna be the month. This is gonna be when I actually read this book. I really enjoyed it. It was a great wrap up to the trilogy in terms of what's happening. This is basically a book and a kind of trilogy series where the world has gone through a kind of pandemic illness. And when the pandemic illness kind of starts to wrap up, people end up having like these magic powers, and some of them have good magic and some of them have like dark magic. And there are these two factions that start to kind of war against each other, the good side and the dark side. And there's a child that is born in end of book one, and then we hear the story of book two. She's considered the one. She's like the one who's going to kind of save the people who are on the good side of the magic. And we hear more of her story in book three. And of course, we have a resolution to this war that's happening between the good magic side and the dark magic side. All right, then I picked up Catherine Center's Things You Save in a Fire. Catherine Center is now an auto read author for me. I think she is great. I love her books. This is a book about a female firefighter who ends up moving home to take care of her mother when she's ill. And she's kind of coming up against a very like gender dynamic in this firehouse, where she's trying to prove herself as a female firefighter, as the only female firefighter in this firehouse, and ends up developing a romance with one of the other firefighters. I think Catherine Center's stuff is just great. I haven't read her entire backlist, but I definitely will. Okay, keep going. So the next book that I picked up, kind of on a whim, is a book called The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart. Apparently this author is a podcaster who like wrote a fiction book. I think she writes, she does podcasting about like cold cases or mysteries or something like that. And then she wrote this book. I think the book was fine. It's an interesting story basically about a serial killer and then like the medical examiner who is examining the bodies of the serial killer and trying to like figure out what's going on. There's a couple twists in it that I found interesting. What I would say though is this book is very short. I think it was like under 250 pages, and it felt like half a book to me. It felt like a novella. Like it didn't really feel like a fully fleshed out novel. And I was interested enough in the characters that I would have totally taken a fully fleshed out novel from this. So it felt kind of like half done. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, you know, with this author, if she's kind of creating other books, but it was disappointing to me from that perspective, is I would have liked more, and I felt like it was a little bit short. All right, then I picked up a book called The Cactus by Sarah Haywood. This is a book that I kind of like stumbled across, I think, at my online library and decided to pick it up. This book reminded me a lot of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, I think is the title of the book. I'll drop a cover into the video so you can see what I'm referring to. This is basically a book about a very cranky woman who like basically lives her own life. Like she has created a life that works for her. She has very particular ways of doing things. And when we start out the book, this is not a spoiler, we find out very early on that she is pregnant. And she is trying to kind of like figure out what to do. Her one of her parents has also recently died, and so there's kind of some things going on with that. And then eventually she kind of has a romance in this book, but not with the child's father. I feel like if you liked Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, you would like this book. If you like characters that are a little bit cranky and that are not necessarily meant to be likable in the beginning, but then eventually, you know, kind of become likable, it might be something for you to check out. Okay, then I picked up the first in a series that I've never read before. I picked up A Share in Death by Deborah Crombie. This is the first book in the Duncan Kincaid and Gemma James series, where there's basically like police officers that are partnering together to solve crimes. In this particular book, Duncan Kincaid is on vacation and there's a body that's found in this like resort that he's staying in. And then Gemma James comes in to kind of help him solve this crime. I would definitely read more in this particular series. I actually think there's quite a few books in this series. And I had just never dipped into it before, but I love a new mystery series. I felt like this one also had, part of why I picked it up is somebody had said, if you like Louise Penny, Armand Gamage, you might like this series. It's kind of like a small town murder mystery kind of series. And I enjoyed it. All right, then I picked up Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is a book that I actually had on my list, I think over the summer to read, and I just never got around to it. It is a very charming romance about a woman who is a meteorologist at a local television station, and she starts to have a relationship with a sports reporter who is also at this television station. And part of why they get together is they each report to one half of a couple that are divorced, and they're trying to get them back together. So they're kind of scheming to get their bosses to be back into romance together. One of the things that I loved about this book is it had these very charming ways of bringing in weather-related analogies. Like each chapter has like a forecast, and it kind of gives you a little sense of like where the chapter is going. This is also a book that I thought handled very well the topic of depression, because the female character, we learned this very early on, suffers from depression and takes medication for it. And this has actually been something that's really stood in the way of her relationships in the past. And so she kind of like tackles it head on in this particular relationship that she's starting to build with the sports writer. And very, I would say, like realistic portrayals of some of the relationship challenges that can come up when one side of the partnership or even both sides of the partnership have mental health issues. So found that really interesting. Okay, next up, also part of my alphabet challenge, I read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is a book that I would not typically pick up because it is more of like a military focused book, fantasy, of course. And it's not something that I would normally pick up, but I had seen a lot of people talking about it, and I'm really glad I chose it for my alphabet challenge. The first half of this book is basically about a young girl who tests her way into a kind of special school, and then it's like her time getting educated in this school. So the first half, if you're kind of like into like the Harry Potter school, you know, like stories that you see in that kind of book, like that's the first half of this book. The second half of the book takes a bit of a turn because a war begins and all of these students then go to war. So it's a very different kind of second half of the book. The first half is more on the training, and then the second half is about this kind of conflict and war, and it's a lot darker than what you see in the first half. I'm still kind of not sure if I want to continue with the other three books in this, or the other two books in this trilogy. I have them all on Kindle. I'm kind of intrigued by where this ended in the first book in terms of the main character and kind of the responsibilities that she's kind of being asked to take on. I feel like I had a better understanding by the end of the book of like what was actually happening, because it takes a while in world building to kind of understand the plot and like what's happening there. So that took me a little while to kind of figure out. But overall, I enjoyed it. This was over 500 pages, so definitely lengthier. I did listen to it on audio, thought the audio was really well done. So I'll have to kind of give more thought as to whether or not I want to kind of continue with this trilogy. It's not really about the quality of the narrative. It's more just like this isn't kind of the thing that I typically would read, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't pick up another book. Next up, I picked up a book called Love and Work by Marcus Buckingham. This is subtitled How to Find What You Love what you do, and do it for the rest of your life. I love books about work and career. As you can tell, I read a few of them this month. This is a book, like kind of one of the most interesting parts of this book that I wasn't anticipating and didn't really understand would happen. Maybe like 2/3 of the way through the book, we find out that Marcus Buckingham was partnered and then divorced from one of the people that was involved in kind of the cheating scandal about kids getting into college. And his ex-wife was one of the people who paid Rick Singer to like get a test taken for one of her kids. And so what's interesting is the author of this book, he is associated with one of the kind of survey instruments of helping you to understand like what your strengths are in your career. And so he kind of talks about how this happened like within his family, and it's in some ways like in direct opposition to his values of how he wants people to kind of like understand how they can apply like their true selves to their work and their education. So it was interesting. Like I just wasn't expecting that to be part of the narrative. And I did appreciate in this book, there were a series of kind of reflective questions to kind of get you thinking about your career, what you really care about, what you want to pursue. So I would definitely recommend it, but there was kind of this other extra like layer under the surface that I wasn't anticipating about kind of his personal story and how it connects with like his own kind of mission and values of what he's trying to do with his career. All right, then I picked up also as part of my alphabet challenge, The Patron Saint of Liars by Ann Patchett. This is a book that when I first picked it for my alphabet challenge, I completely forgot that I had actually read it. I read this book in like 2014, according to Goodreads. And, but I was like, you know what? I remember nothing. So I'm just going to keep it on my alphabet challenge list and I'm going to revisit it. The book is split into thirds. The first third is kind of the main character. The second third is her daughter. And then the second third is someone she becomes romantically partnered with. And then the third is her daughter. The overall premise of this book is there is like a home for unwed girls where they come and have children. And they're kind of sent to this home to have children, and then they're sent back to kind of their normal lives, and the children that they give birth to are adopted out. And there is a woman who runs away from her husband after she becomes pregnant and goes to this home and decides to stay there and ends up, I don't want to give away plot points, but she decides to stay there and develops relationships with people that are in this home, and eventually has her daughter, and of course keeps her daughter, and her daughter is raised in this environment. I love Ann Patchett. I've read several of her books. There are definitely some in her backlist I haven't gotten to yet. She's also a wonderful essayist. When I started reading this, some of it kind of came back to me, but honestly not a whole lot. I felt like I was kind of reading it for the first time. Like maybe 20% of the information was something that I remembered. I tend to have a horrible memory for this kind of thing, which is why I track what I read, because otherwise I would not remember. I would just pick up books and read them over and over again. So I enjoyed revisiting it. I thought it was really fun. Obviously highly recommended because I think her work is great. I also picked up a book by Greg McKeown called Effortless. This is also the person who has a first book that he wrote, and now the name is escaping me. I will drop the cover into the video. The first book that he wrote was basically about essentialism, is what it's called. He wrote a book called Essentialism, and is about kind of like narrowing, prioritizing. In some ways, it's a little bit about minimalism. And then he wrote this book called Effortless, which was kind of a follow-up, and I decided to pick it up. The one kind of takeaway that I remember from this book as being really important is he talks about trying to set up your day of work so that you don't need, basically so that you can recover in the evening time, and try to set up your week of work so that you can recover over the weekend. And he's basically talking about not overworking. And it's been a very long time, I think, since I have had an amount of work that I felt like I could recover from in those shorter periods of time. This is partially why I read so much, because I consider reading to be kind of recovery time, but it was kind of eye-opening to think about. We do have a culture where basically like we're expecting ourselves to get so much done during the day or the week that it's kind of unreasonable. And so it was kind of interesting to see some of the things that he was bringing up. I think that Essentialism to me was more of kind of like a cornerstone book of what he's trying to do. So I would definitely read that first. But I enjoyed this as kind of a follow-up to that first book. All right, then I read, because of all the hype, I read all 4 of the Heartstopper graphic novels by Alice Oseman. This is something that I first kind of came across my radar because it was adapted for a streaming service, and I haven't watched it, but I had kind of heard a lot of people talking about this. It's very popular as a series. There's a 5th book that's going to be coming out, a 5th graphic novel, and so I decided to pick it up. General storyline is you have 2 boys in high school, one of them who is out as gay, the other one who is not. They become close friends, and this is not a spoiler. They basically fall in love and they begin to have a relationship with each other. This is a series that I would give a couple of trigger warnings for. Definitely there is some like homophobia that is coming up in this series from various kind of characters or family members. But later on in the series, we also deal with kind of some mental health issues and also disordered eating. So I would just kind of give some trigger warnings for that come up throughout the series. These are really quick reads because they're about 250-page graphic novels. You could probably get through them in under an hour, each. And definitely I would recommend going back to the source before you watch the adaptation, because it's just kind of fun to see what the author was originally trying to do. Okay, then I picked up another YA novel that I've also heard just be hyped so much, and it's called They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This book takes place in a world where you have some kind of, it's not clear like how this happens, but basically like there's some level of awareness of when someone is going to die. And because we know when people are going to die in this particular world, they get a call like 24 hours before the death is going to happen. Like they get called at like 12:01, after midnight of the day that they're going to die. They could die 2 hours later. They could die 23 hours later. Like that part is unknown, but sometime that day they're going to die. And basically what this allows people to do is like, they can like get their affairs in order. They can like take care of anything, that they want to, but at some point, they're going to die in that 24-hour period. Well, in this particular book, you have 2 young boys, teenage boys, who connect over this kind of like social media experience for people who get this call. And you can like connect with another person who's gotten a call like this, and they decide to spend their last, 24 hours together, basically. And it's an interesting book. Like I wasn't, I didn't know what to expect. Like I had no idea what this was about going into the book. There's a prequel that was written about this world as well. I'll probably pick it up. I do enjoy kind of this kind of young adult, I guess science fiction. It would be kind of the best way to describe it. So yeah, it was an interesting read. Okay, just a few more as I'm wrapping up the month. Next, I picked up a book by Greer Hendricks called The Golden Couple. And this was another book that I just like randomly ran across. I saw somebody mention it. It looked interesting. And basically this is a story about a therapist who has a very particular way of doing therapy, where over like 10 sessions, she like brings a client to the conclusion of whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. And there is a couple that comes to this therapist because the woman has cheated on her husband, but she wants to fix their relationship. And so the therapist is going through this kind of series of steps that she takes other clients through. Kind of a twist is that this therapist has had her license taken away because she has kind of these unconventional methods of how she does therapy. And so she actually is practicing without a license, and everybody knows she's practicing without a license, but she's become kind of popular for this methodology that she has. And so people still come to her. So this is basically a story. There is a connection between the therapist and this couple that is kind of unknown at the time of them coming into the sessions. But I thought this was like creative. I thought it was kind of an interesting twist on kind of a thriller suspense, kind of story. So would recommend that one as well. All right, next I picked up a book called The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. This is another hyped book that I've just seen a lot of people talk about. It also takes place in Alaska, so there's kind of a theme this month of different books taking place in Alaska, where a girl goes to visit her father because he's become ill. They've been estranged for, I think, over a dozen years. And she's originally from, she was born in Alaska. Her mother and her move away. They moved to like Toronto, and then she flies back to Alaska to be with him when he's ill. While she's there, she kind of meets and begins to have a relationship with a pilot. Her father is a pilot, and he kind of owns this airport and all these planes. And there's someone who flies for him that the woman begins to have a relationship with. And basically, it's kind of this story of like, how do you kind of compromise in a relationship? Because with her parents, like they were not able to compromise. Like the mother did not want to stay in this kind of small town in Alaska. The father was not willing to leave, you know, his flying. And then now you're kind of setting up the same situation with this pilot and the daughter. And we're trying to kind of see how is this going to resolve itself, because we saw how it did not resolve itself with the parents. So this is the first in a series. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 books in this series. I thought this was interesting. It didn't like completely blow me away, but I would probably pick up, you know, the next book just to kind of see what happens with the characters as they continue on in the story. All right, then I picked up the first book in a series that I had not read before by David Baldacci. This is called Long Road to Mercy, and it's the first in the Atlee Pine series. Atlee Pine is an FBI agent, and there's kind of 2 storylines that are happening in this book. The one is like the more typical storyline, a crime has happened. Atlee Pine is like trying to resolve that crime, and there are various like high-speed chases and various other things that happen on that side of the story. I enjoyed that part of the story. The part that kind of sucked me in more, though, was this other storyline. Atlee Pine is a twin, and when she was young, a serial killer came into her bedroom where she was with her twin and basically played a game about like which one of them he was going to take, and he ended up taking her twin. Her twin's name is Mercy. And in the very beginning of this book, and at the I won't say what happens at the end of this book, but in the beginning of this book, she goes to visit the serial killer and is trying to figure out where her sister is, because they never found her sister, who was taken when she was young. This is obviously a series. Like I would imagine we'll see a lot of things, you know, kind of come together in terms of that second storyline. But it was solid. I mean, this was a book that I listened to it on audio, would definitely pick up another book in this series. Look forward to kind of following along with those characters. All right, and the last book that I read in December is The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark. I loved this author's other book, The Last Flight, and so I wanted to pick up this book. This is an alternating narrative between 2 women. The first of the women is a con artist, and then the second woman is someone who is a journalist, and she's kind of trying to like, not catch the con artist, but like tell the world about the con artist so that they kind of understand what she's trying to do. And of course, we find out over the course of the book how the women came to know each other. We find out that there's obviously a level of depth to what the con artist is trying to achieve that we were not aware of. And I would say I put this right up there with The Last Flight. Like I really enjoyed this. I would definitely read this author again. She has a great way of like alternating the storylines, keeping you really engaged, keeping you guessing as to like what exactly is happening in the narrative as well. So yeah, really enjoyed that as my final book of December. So yes, those are, I think, the 41 books that I read over the course of December, and so many really good ones in there. And I will be back soon with another video about the books that I'm hoping to read in January, and some of the kind of interesting challenges that I'm giving to myself over the course of 2023, in addition to my alphabet challenge, which I'm going to keep up as well. So stay tuned for that video. And in the meantime, happy reading.